And so there's utility in being defeated by a skillful opponent. And my wife is precisely that sort of opponent, and also has the additional remarkable talent of being able to string together a list of vicious insults, one after the other, like no one I have ever encountered in my life. It's quite comical because sometimes when we're embroiled in conflict, she'll start to do that, and she'll say something so outrageous, so absolutely beyond the pale, that it'll make me laugh and crack up. And then, of course, that's very useful because there is something ridiculous about fighting, and that always brings it back to mind. And when she does that, then I'm reminded why I liked her so much back then and still do, because it's something to see someone with that kind of combative spirit, and so hooray for that. So speech must be untrammeled so that dialogue can take place, so that we can all humbly learn. Well, that's the other element of humility, is that humility is a precondition for learning, right? And you have to be open to the possibility that you don't know what you need to know. That's the thing. It's not that you don't know everything, because obviously you don't know everything, but it's more specific than that, is that you may not know what you need to know. Sometime in your life there's going to be a piece of information that's crucial. It'll be in a negotiation, or maybe in a medical decision, or maybe in a relationship decision, or in a complex and tense situation of emergency and danger, and you'll need a tool at hand then and there, or things will go badly for you. And you won't have it because there was an opportunity at some point in your life where, had you been slightly more humble, you would have learned how to formulate and utilize that tool right then and there, and you didn't, and that left you unarmed. And the thing is that your most powerful arms are your words by any measure. And the opportunity that you have to sharpen your capacity to use your words through combative dialogue, which is why spaces cannot be safe for any length of time. It's because the safer the space is made now, the more dangerous the space is made in the future. And that's something that people are unwilling to understand, because they don't want to face the fundamental truth that life is suffering and that there's no real escape from it. And so they make artificial spaces where people can delude themselves temporarily in their naivety that life can be made safe, when in fact the best you can do is arm people to move forward. And the best way you do that is to test them with combat at every opportunity that you have, and to do that with the most carefully crafted arguments at your disposal, and to teach them to stand up and defend their thoughts, so that when they enter the real world and they're challenged, they know how to stand up forthrightly instead of crying and running home. So that we can all humbly learn, so that truth can serve love. Well, that's the goal, is to inform yourself. And that's a good word, to inform yourself. It's of course the short form of information. And I really like that word because it breaks into information. And something information is formed properly and in order. It's information. Right? Everything is aligned and moving in the same way, like an army in formation. And so if you expose yourself to information, you get informed, and you put yourself in formation, and then you're crystalline in your structure and difficult to contend with. And that's what you want to be. That's the thing to be. And you do that by learning humbly, and then once you are informed, then your capacity to speak properly and to formulate your arguments and to negotiate and to formulate problems and to formulate solutions and to seek consensus makes you powerful enough, not so much that tragedy stays away from you, because it can't, but so that when tragedy does come along, and perhaps even when malevolence comes along, that you'll be maximally prepared for it and will be able to deal with it, which is what you have to do as a human being, because there is in fact no avoiding it. And so what you do with someone that you love is you make them strong. You do not tell them that the world's safe and that they're secure and that there's nothing there to get them, because there is everything there to get them. And so the best you can do is strengthen them. And that's what a college is supposed to do. And that's what a university is supposed to do. And I would say that the colleges and the universities are increasingly failing on both of those fronts. And it might be said that that's isolated only to the colleges and universities, but we should remember that those are the storehouses of our cultural knowledge and the generators of the new leaders. And if the universities falter, and that's particularly true of the humanities, then that faltering undermines the entire culture and perhaps the entire civilization. And I do believe that we are in the process of doing precisely that now. And I don't think that what I did 6 months ago in the creating of these 2 little videos complaining about a rather obscure piece of legislation in a rather tiny and insignificant country would have attracted the attention that it did attract if it was only about pronouns. It's certainly not only about pronouns. In fact, it's not about pronouns at all. So that truth can serve love. Well, you want to articulate yourself and you want to be information so that you can formulate your existence, you can generate your narrative, you can take your position in the world forthrightly and with the capacity to intimidate when necessary, and with the capacity to be a monster when necessary, and to be civilized when necessary. And there's nothing in that making yourself sharper won't improve. To make yourself sharper is to carry a sharper sword. And of course, in these days when the highest virtue is harmlessness, a message like that seems positively perverse, but it's completely wrong. And this is partly why I think my talks attract so many men, is that a woman who hates you wants to castrate you and make you safe that way, but a woman who loves you wants to make you incredibly powerful and wise, because then your capacity for destruction is regulated in that manner, and you're still good for something. And so that would be the optimal solution, rather than merely weakening and destroying. And I think we've had plenty of that. We've had more than enough for that. And I know as well that women who have their souls intact would rather have monstrous men who were civilized than cringing milksops who were harmless but good for nothing. Most women already have enough children to take care of. So that truth can serve love, so that suffering can be ameliorated. Well, obviously, that's the goal. And no, I hear people all the time who are possessed by a certain nihilism of spirit, and that's not surprising. The understructure, the foundations of our culture have been severely assaulted, I would say, and are under tremendous assault now. That's a process that has been unfolding for very many years, perhaps since the development of empirical science, which is one of the contributing factors, because it's undermined our faith in our traditional religious viewpoints, and those structure our moral behaviors and our decisions about value. There's many other reasons why the foundations upon which Western civilization rests are under assault. And because of that, it's easy to be uncertain and to say, well, what is the meaning of life? There's nothing to life. We're all insignificant, and there's nothing but suffering. And why should I do anything in the face of all that? And I would say, well, we can take that. Part of that as a fundamental truth is that the fact that life is suffering is a meaning, and it's a meaning that no amount of rational argumentation will rescue you from. In fact, the more nihilistic you become, the more the fact that life is suffering becomes self-evident. It's almost as if it was trying to teach you something, and it is trying to teach you something. It's trying to teach you that you can't argue your way out of suffering, and so then you might as well do something about it. And then I would say, well, that's where you can find the meaning. It's very straightforward. There's suffering in the world, and much of it is abhorrent and unacceptable to anyone who attends to it, anyone who looks at it. And the right answer to a child who's being beaten and abused is not who's going to care in a million years, but what can I do to stop that right now? And the nihilistic response that everything is insignificant means that the pain of children, for example, is insignificant, and that seems to be, to me, close enough to self-evidently wrong so that it's an argument that can just be dispensed with. And so I might say to people who are wondering where to look for the meaning in their life is to take the self-evident phenomena of suffering seriously and to orient themselves as rapidly as possible towards its amelioration and to work diligently towards that end for a number of years, and then to reevaluate their life at the end of that and see if they think any differently about the world, because they certainly will. And so the nihilistic argument to me seems remarkably weak, both on its face and in depth, because there are things to be done. And the things that need to be done are obvious to anyone who will open their eyes and look at them. And so then I would say, well, open your eyes and look what needs to be done immediately around you, and do it, and keep doing that, and keep doing it, and then you'll find that the answers to the questions that you have that have been paralyzing you for so many years will manifest themselves to you clearly enough so that you won't have to believe them, because they will be self-evident. So that suffering can be ameliorated, so that we can all stumble forward. Well, why stumble? Well, that's because we stumble when we move forward, because we don't know everything, and so we move forward in error constantly, which is why we need to speak with other people and listen so that we don't stumble and fall and be unable to arise. And so we stumble forward because forward movement is necessary to human beings, and forward movement implies that there is something better to go to. And there is something better to go to, and that is at least a world where there is the least amount of suffering that is commensurate with the existence of the world. And I would say that we have ameliorated a substantial amount of suffering in the 20th century. We're doing a very good job of doing such things as combating absolute poverty. You may or may not know that every single day about 150,000 people worldwide are lifted out of absolute poverty, and about 300,000 people are attached to the electrical grid, and that we have been enriching the bottom segment of the world's population for the last 15 years at a rate that's absolutely unprecedented in human history. And that makes me wonder just how well we could do if everyone really put their shoulders to the wheel and pushed. And so if we did that together, then perhaps we won't degenerate into absolute chaos, which is certainly something that lurks now and is a real threat. We're at a crisis point as far as I can tell. And we need to determine whether we want everything to go to hell, which it certainly could, and I wouldn't recommend that, or whether or not we can work together. And that brings me to the last line, which is that so that we can all stumble forward to the kingdom of God. And why do I put it that way? And the reason I put it that way is because, well, first of all, everybody does really know what that means, even though they may not believe in it, but that doesn't really matter. I mean, I think that to believe is to act, and not to spout a set of statements. And it is certainly possible to act as if what you were attempting to do is bring about the kingdom of God. And I would say that doing so is something that will radically justify your miserable existence. And that's really what you need, is radical justification for your miserable existence. And because human beings are so powerful, really powerful beyond the limits of our imagination, we have no idea what our ultimate destiny might be, that it's not clear what our limits are, and that if we decided to improve the place, let's say, and I would say starting with ourselves, because that is the safest and humblest way to begin, that there's no telling where we might end up. And since we're all fragile and vulnerable creatures, and we're going to lose everything anyways, we might as well risk everything to obtain the highest possible good, and then that will make the misery that constitutes our life bearable as a consequence of our intrinsic nobility. And there's nothing in that except the good. And so then why not do it? And so that's what I would enjoin and encourage everyone to do, because there's nothing better to do than that. And we might as well all do that which there is nothing better than. And so I'll repeat the outline and end. Now, I was talking about the boundaries of free speech, and I believe that speech should be untrammeled because it's too dangerous to encapsulate it, but that does not mean that I believe that free speech comes without responsibility. I believe quite the contrary, that free speech carries with it the highest responsibility, because if you wish the right to speak and wish to shoulder the responsibility of speaking, then you have to contend with the fact that your words are the force that shapes the world, and that with every word you utter, things tilt slightly heavenward or slightly hellward, and that responsibility rests firmly on your shoulders, and it's inescapable. And that's a terrible thing to realize, although it is a very meaningful thing to realize. And people say that they would like their life to be meaningful, but that's a questionable claim, because to recognize your life as meaningful is to understand that everything you do matters, and that what it means for things to matter is that you're deciding, in some sense, between heaven on earth and hell on earth with every decision that you make, and that the decisions that you make echo far beyond you in ways that are almost incomprehensible, and that the destiny of the world is determined by the collective decisions of all the individuals that make up the world, and that we're all locked together deciding in which metaphysical direction our little planet will go. So free speech carries with it heavy responsibility, but the responsibility is something you want because it justifies the suffering of existence. So life is suffering. Love is the desire to see unnecessary suffering ameliorated. Truth is the handmaid of love. Dialogue is the pathway to truth. Humility, that's recognition of personal insufficiency and the willingness to learn. To learn is to die voluntarily and to be born again in great ways and small. So speech must be untrammeled so that dialogue can take place, so that we can all humbly learn, so that truth can serve love, so that suffering can be ameliorated, so that we can all stumble forward towards the kingdom of God. Thank you for inviting me to McMinnville.
Oh, nothingness. Bleh! Heaven preserve us from that. But